the amazing thing about this trip was, and I don't care, I mean, maybe you think that we're headed into a World War III with Russia, and this is the new Cold War and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, I don't care what country it is. If we got word that Israel had done something like this to us, and there was, and look, granted, they do it in the open. We do this. Obviously, we do this as well. But just as I would look to the people of the countries that we interfere with their elections and imagine the citizens there would be like, hey, you can't do that to us. And hey, you, America helped put Pinochet in. Like, I don't like Pinochet. And I don't think this is right. Okay. It's perfectly normal to react that way and say, this is wrong. We shouldn't do it, and they shouldn't do it. And you can also say, like, there was multiple reasons why Hillary Clinton lost. I'm starting to think that this one, I didn't think necessarily before that it was a reason. I'm starting to think it could very well have been a reason. I mean, it's, demonstrably so. I think obviously...
Took you long enough, Jew boy.
But with all that said, the idea that a president would go and meet with the head of that country and not cancel the meeting is strange, right? Like the first reaction would be like, we're canceling the meeting. That's the way that we punish. We will reschedule for 3 months from now. The second thing you would do would be to bring it up in the meeting beforehand. And at one point he's asked by CBS, like, are you going to talk about this? And he goes, well, I hadn't thought about that. I might do that. Like, obviously they're not sitting around and saying like, this is how you should handle it, Mr. President. Here is the beginning when Trump and Putin, this was, I guess, yesterday, right? Or earlier this morning, I guess, in Helsinki before they actually met and their press conference.
Most importantly, we have a lot of good things to talk about and things to talk about. We have discussions on everything from trade to military to missiles to nuclear to China. We'll be talking a little bit about China. Our mutual friend, President Xi.
We
can skip a little bit of the translation here.
Yeah. No, the best part I like is where you could just, like, Putin's just sitting there going like, this guy's just naming, he just named the president of China.
He's just doing a list of things as if this is covering substantive topic. Right. This guy is great. This synergy of narcissism and sociopathy is really going to work.
I think we have great opportunities together as two countries that, frankly, we have not been getting along very well for the last number of years. I've been here not too long, but it's getting close to 2 years. But I think we will end up having an extraordinary relationship. I hope so. I've been saying, and I'm sure you've heard over the years, and as I campaign, that getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing.
A little bit more.
Get it.
And I really think the world wants to see us get along. We are the two great nuclear powers. We have 90% of the nuclear, and that's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. And I think we hopefully can do something about that, because it's not a positive force, it's a negative force. So we'll be talking about that, among other things.
Yeah. Now, of course, there's no benchmarks. There was no outlines of the agenda. This agenda was just sort of, he's winging it. And
was it the case that they actually met with no reporters present?
And, well, they met not only with no reporters, but no advisors. And they had only translators. I wonder even if they had 2 translators or just one.
He said he has one, so I think we're good.
And, he was asked, like, earlier in the week, not that much earlier, like 2 days ago, what's the agenda? And I'll tell you when we're done. Which, of course, is definitionally not what an agenda is supposed to be.
Also, the principle we had of a journalist always being present around the president so we can know what they're doing and be sort of informed about that
here,
sort of thing.
I'll take you. Okay, here's the thing. And I said this on MSNBC this weekend. The best case scenario is we have an incredible lack of transparency, something that is fundamentally anti-democratic. We're not allowed to know what the agenda is. Now, of course, there's some things that may be, secret. That happens. But to not have an agenda, to have no benchmarks against an agenda, to not know what the policy is, to not know what the attempts are, to not know what was said, to not have any record whatsoever of what went on in that room is just fundamentally anti-democratic. You don't need to think that they're sitting in there and Putin is saying, you're going to say this, you're going to do that, and you're going to do this. You don't need to think that to believe that it's fundamentally anti-democratic the way this went off. But that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario runs through Donald Trump being just a total idiot, going in there, accidentally giving away sort of strategic secrets and whatnot, and accidentally making policies or promises that are going to screw up things in the future.
We get reports from Crimea regularly. We've got a guy in the office there.
Yeah. What are you talking about? We
he
know
feeds
this.
us back reports. We read those emails.
There's the mid-level possibility is Putin just goes like, what is the name of that guy, the mole that you have in my cabinet?
Oh, Igor.
Right,
yeah,
Igor.
Keep showing
Igor.
it, yeah.
It's like one of those-
Oh, right. Oh, you didn't know his
like-
name? Oh, I guess that makes
like,
sense because he isn't dead yet.
The
All right.
mid-level scenario looks a lot like Hogan's Heroes, if anybody saw that, with like Hogan and talking to Colonel Click. No, is that too old of a... That's where the in this case, the American POW outfoxes the dumb German commandant.
So
of the camp.
now I am POW.
Right. Exactly. little vice versa. The worst case scenario is, of course, that Donald Trump did in some way agree to push a certain policy outcome because of help that he was getting during the election or because of information that Russia has about him, or it has to do with his finances or whatnot. And Putin's in there and just going like, look, just say that this is what I'm going to do for you, Donald. We will investigate. How's that? And you tell people, that's great. Oh, thank you.
You'll send in a whole team to investigate
Oh
yourselves?
my God.
Wow, that's so
really
generous.
Great. I mean,
you do that for us?
there's, but the bottom line after this whole week, the bottom line, doesn't matter which of those scenarios you believe. The bottom line is the rest of the world, literally the rest of the world, would have to have their collective heads checked out if they relied on the United States going forward. The idea that our country could have elected this guy should really, really terrify any other democratically elected country in the world. I mean, the idea that you could, it speaks to a real fundamental problem in this country that, for us may look like an anomaly in some fashion. Maybe people were, just taking out their frustration about the economy and they elected somebody who's going to jumble things up. That's not the way a responsible person who's outside of this country would look at this. They would have to say there's something fundamentally unstable about that population, that they could elect someone like this. And
I mean, we've had this type of reaction to people like, Jörg Haider being in Austria. Like, in countries that are not nearly as important as us, there have been reactions like, what the hell is going on there that these people get in your office? Not in the world's most powerful,
Right.
most armed,
The
most
stakes are
influential.
too high.
Yeah.
The stakes are too high for the rest of the world. And they're going to start a different trajectory. And again, you don't have to be, an imperialist to perceive that as problematic, because we're still going to have the weaponry and the physical reach that we have. And as we start getting the short end of the stick on things, it's going to give the opportunity for, Tom Cotton or Donald Trump in the second term to do all sorts of other horrible things from a frustrated, on behalf of a frustrated population that was used to walking around with a big stick, but also getting what it wanted, as opposed to walking around with a big stick and not.
Yeah, and when we say population, we mean the aggrieved minority we were just talking about, right?
Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, but you mean the aggrieved minority that voted for Trump?
Right.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. But also, who knows? Maybe it broadens because, if there's a perception that somehow, like, we're getting screwed by everybody as opposed to it being Donald Trump, because at one point we will be. We will be left out. And there's nothing worse than we can see it on a daily basis, than, people who had privilege and losing it. But unfortunately, having big guns.
I also would just like to add really quick, I think that things like NATO do need to be fundamentally changed and reformed, and they are responsible for a massive amount of human misery. But I also think that, people not able to distinguish between evolving out of, a post-power dynamic world versus, Russia regionally recapturing what it wants and then China rising, that's the same thing, just with a different model. And frankly, if we're being blunt, a difference between China and the United States, when the United States is being imperial in a place like Africa and acting on behalf of rapacious corporate interests there is the ability of an activist in a place to exploit the hypocrisy of the United States to highlight an issue. In China, we don't care about those things at home either. Go
Right.
screw yourself.
Right, exactly.
Done.
Exactly. Oh, really? Are we creating some pollution in Africa?
Yeah. So all of the hypocrisies that are real about us are also pressure points. Like when the State Department releases abuses in a country that we're supporting and arming, that is ridiculous, but it's an opening. China's like, all right, here's $3 billion
Right.
and here's a bunch of workers,
Right.
and do whatever the hell you want and get us our money and shut up. That's it.
And I would say about NATO, and I've said this before, I feel like we expanded east more than we should have, and
Very aggressive way.
And there's some real, like you say, fundamental problems with NATO. It also, though, when you unwind from a situation that has basically prevented, and it's not like we weren't, we did have two major world wars where tens of millions of people were killed. That's bad.
Well, that's even, I would argue, even more so the European Union, which is really, if you scrapped the financial mechanism, which is awful, the EU is a very defensible project in terms of what it's built. Wasn't Gorbachev's idea, though, that Russia should join the NATO? I believe Russia was like, yes, just have it, and we'll all be part of it.
Yes.
It'll be a world security.
Yes.
So that was the real answer.
That was a big mistake. There should have been a lot more inclusion, but I think there was, people wanted to maintain a certain dynamic because it paid.
Yeah, and then we terrorized Russia in the 90s. We had them privatize everything. We increased poverty, and we let the mafia take over the country.
Jeffrey Sachs.
Well,
Yep.
Assuming we make it to the next election, I think this should be a big issue. Just broadly speaking, I think Americans are losing their taste for empire. Maybe not the ones who voted for Trump, but a lot of us sure are. So hopefully, I think Bernie Sanders is taking steps to lay out a sort of left foreign policy that's distinct from what we've seen in the past from both Democrats and Republicans. And I hope that that continues to happen.
Totally. And I just think in addition to that, it needs to be post all empire, not just U.S. empire.